Welcome, everyone, to our annual Love and Adolescence webinar from the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today for this discussion about this important topic. My name is Adriana Galvan. I'm a neuroscientist who studies adolescent brain development. I'm also a co-executive director of the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. And the goal of our center is to promote the integration of developmental science into policies, practices, and public discourse that support our young people. This webinar is part of our Love and Adolescence series. I started this about 5 years ago, to discuss such an integral experience during adolescence, which is love and relationships. Many of us may have or all of us have our first experience with love and relationships during this time. And we know it is such a crucial part of our understanding about relationships and the dynamics that go along with it. In general, adolescence is a critical time of development. We learn so much between the ages of 10 to 25 about relationships, autonomy, how to navigate more complex social relationships, and a general social landscape that changes as we transition from middle school into high school and then out of high school. And although peers and friends and romantic partners become increasingly important during this time, we know that there are other relationships that continue to grow, and that is the relationship with caring adults. And caring adults play such a crucial role in how adolescents interpret and process and understand the changing social landscape around them. Research is clear that relationships with adults, including parents and guardians and other mentors, teachers, etc., are extremely important for positive development during adolescence. We know that support and caring adults can bolster mental health and increase overall well-being and even predict successful relationships into adulthood. And so today we're going to talk about the importance of having love and support from caring adults during adolescence. And we'll talk a little bit about how that love and support can also support the romantic relationships that young people are beginning to experience during this time. I'm really excited that we have an excellent panel today to have this discussion. Joining me today is Andrew Fellini, who is a professor of psychology here at UCLA and the center's other co-executive director. We have Kara Hirano, who's a senior research scientist at the Search Institute, and we have Odalis Hernandez, who is a member of our Youth Scientific Council and also a senior at Alexander Hamilton High School. Thank all of you for being here today. I know all of you are very busy people, so we appreciate that you carved out the time to have this conversation. Now, before we begin this discussion, I want to provide some details about the format. We'll leave about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A, and we encourage you to add your questions through the Q&A function throughout the discussion so that we can be responsive to them when we have a minute. So we'll also be recording this discussion, and we'll have it available on our website, on the CDA website, and YouTube after the session. So, okay, with that said, let's begin. Andrew, you study developmental psychology and focus on how social contexts and impact development. So to start us off, can you give us a broad overview of why relationships with caring adults are so important for positive development during adolescence?
Sure. Thanks, Adriana. One of the most exciting and remarkable things about adolescence is the expansion and the maturation of our social world. It's really remarkable, the changes that we go through and that we see. A lot of the attention, understandably, focuses on the expansion of our peer relationships and our friendships. We meet a lot of new people as we move into middle school, as we get outside into the neighborhood. We have deeper relationships with friends. We have romantic feelings, more romantic relationships. There's a lot of energy there. But at the same time, this expansion and maturation of the social world also includes adults, and it's just as important as we pay attention to the significance of relationships during adolescence. That expansion and maturation often includes adults outside of the family. It could be teachers, it could be mentors, it could be coaches, it could be people in the neighborhood. It also happens with inside the family. Our relationships with our parents and other adults in our family will mature and they will change. And really, one important part of that is they really do need to shift and evolve to accommodate and to support our developing capacities as we move through the adolescent years. Basically, we're trying to figure out who we are, where do we belong, who are we going to spend time with, and we're constantly looking for sources of support, energy, and information on how to succeed in that process of adolescence. And that includes adults within the family and outside of the family. And what's remarkable about it is that relationships with parents and other caring adults, whether inside or outside of the family, remain among the most, if not the most important, significant predictors of so many aspects of health and adjustment during adolescence. It bolsters positive mental health and physical health. It helps us to create a healthy sense of identity. It will be associated with higher self-esteem. It will predict our relationships with other folks later on into adulthood. It will predict our relationships with our friends as we move through adolescence. And it even will be associated and play a role in brain growth in some fundamental regions of the brain that are going through significant changes during adolescence, such as those processing motivation, rewards, regulating emotions, and our understanding of the social world.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to follow up, I myself am a parent of an adolescent and a pre-adolescent, and sometimes it doesn't feel like the relationships remain as strong or as important with parents. So can you say a little bit more about why it may not feel that way, but how we know that it is?
Well, when you look at time use among adolescents, they simply spend less time with it when their parents than they do. It's
Hmm.
really a remarkable shift. It's the way our
Yeah.
schools are structured, after school activities. And so we think that we're not as important to them. But
Yeah.
as you have probably already experienced, and as you will continue to experience, and I now have young men who are in their mid to late 20s, they will keep coming back to you.
Yeah.
At the times that you just don't anticipate. In many ways, I sort of try to think about it as in a lot of ways, you're sort of setting up the scaffold to help them get through adolescence and to learn and mature. And gradually that scaffold almost becomes like a net. So you're there to sort of catch them as they fall or as they need more information on how to get to the next level of that scaffold.
Yeah, that's such a good analogy because sometimes it doesn't feel like they're paying attention, but knowing that we're there is probably more than half of it to feel the support that they need. Thank you. Adela, so thank you for being here. And to start us off, can you talk about why you accepted our invitation to be here today and why this topic matters to you?
Yes, of course. So, as a first generation student, this topic really resonates with me because I'm often the first in my family to experience many parts of adolescence living here in America. And that can range from navigating school pressures to learning how to fill out college applications. And although my parents, they're extremely supportive, there's moments where they haven't personally gone through many of the things I'm experiencing. Um, and it can feel overwhelming and build a lot of stress, but knowing that there's other adults who I can turn to, especially at school, knowing there's teachers and counselors who are able to provide me with the support I need has been a huge relief for me, and especially when they make themselves available to us. So having those caring adults as a support system helps quite a lot because I know that I'm not navigating everything completely alone. And at the same time, it's just as important knowing that when things go wrong, I can always go back to my parents and have them for emotional support. During adolescence, it's super important to have like a variety of different adults, each providing their own perspectives. And that has helped me feel more confident as I begin to develop my own interests and goals.
Thank you. I really appreciate that perspective. I think, I mean, we haven't chatted about this, but I think you and I have had a very similar experience. Same thing. My parents didn't have much experience or any experience at all with navigating, for example, applying to college. And so it was really
Mhm.
helpful to have other people um, who offered support and guidance, even when I didn't really realize I needed it because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so having those adults who were kind of looking out for me or signaled that they were was really helpful and affirming. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I really appreciate it. Um, so we know that caring adults, as you mentioned, don't need to be parents or guardians, and often they're not because, as Andrew mentioned, there's a little bit of um, shifting in relationships with parents. But what makes a caring adult effective at supporting adolescent development? Because support comes in many different ways. And Kara, I was hoping that you could provide a little bit of context given your expertise in studying developmental relationships and natural mentors.
Sure, thank you. Yes, and I think this is a really great question, which is what led me to Search Institute's work about a decade ago before I started working for them. But when we talk about developmental relationships and natural mentors, as both Andrew and Adalis have already started alluding to, that they are those everyday adults that are beyond the extended fam or the immediate family. They can be extended family members, but that cross paths with youth, and that they have the potential to become these trusted adults who offer support and guidance for youth. And so when they emerge organically and are a part of a youth social network, and the youth identify them as somebody who they see as providing this support and guidance. We call that an informal or natural mentor, which is different from youth that are participating in programs where they're matched with an adult and kind of supervised by a program. Very few, a small percentage of youth participate in that, but a majority, nearly 75% of you say that they can identify at least one natural mentor in their life. So it's really much more common and can be profoundly influential, as Andrew was alluding to. So at Search Institute, we do study developmental relationships, and the way that we define them is that there's these close connections that youth have that provide these ongoing opportunities for them to be able to discover who they are and to develop the skills to be able to pursue their own and manage their own life, but then learn how to interact with the world and contribute to the world around them.
Hmm.
So it really goes beyond that caring piece, which is the foundation. It is really
Hmm.
critical, but there's these other components that make it, what something that we call a developmental relationship. And then, as Andrew said, there are, a host of really positive outcomes for youth that report these strong developmental relationships. And so, in our work for youth that report having a strong developmental relationship, we see them also reporting more positive outcomes in terms of academic motivation and engagement and belonging, and character strengths like responsibility and teamwork, social emotional skills. And so there really is a lot of benefit to these caring adult relationships that you see as natural mentors.
Thank you. I think it's so fascinating that, and I love the work that you all do at Search, thinking about these developmental relationships and what the characteristics are that would define that a successful developmental relationship. And you highlighted that it's not enough to be caring. That is the foundation, and of course, necessary for this relationship to thrive. But what else beyond that is what will establish a relationship that is built on respect and mutual understanding?
Sure. We have the developmental relationships framework at Search Institute that helps really kind of provide these concrete steps and, a simple framework with its 5 elements and 20 actions that adults can take in order to build these developmental relationships. And I can walk through each of the 5 elements just quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, So the first one is express care because, as we have said, it is the foundation. But when we are listening to youth talk about what does expressing care mean to you, it's really that they feel known and valued by the adult, that they can tell that you like being with them, that you pay attention to them and are present when you're together, and that they just feel cared about. So that's really the foundation. And then, as you said, it moves beyond that. And one of the most common elements that youth report experiencing next, and that's the next element, is challenging growth. And of course, that's common, especially in school environments where, there's learning and growth happening, and teachers are kind of pushing youth to grow and learn. But this also includes just expecting youth to live up to their potential, to helping them learn from mistakes and setbacks that they have when they inevitably occur. But of course, you'll see that these elements are really interrelated because you really need to have a good, solid foundation and relationship to be able to have it be respected or accepted to challenge the growth of a student.
Hmm. Hmm.
So next then is providing support. Because let's not challenge growth without providing, that support in order for youth to be able to grow, to take some of those risks and try to achieve those goals. So it can be helping them navigate systems and different challenges that they have and providing them the confidence and encouragement to be able to navigate challenges, but then also knowing that sometimes youth want or need you to step in to be an advocate for them as well. So providing support in that way.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is sharing power. And this is about treating adolescents and youth with respect and giving them a say in things that affect them and starting to collaborate more in terms of goal setting and problem solving and really giving them a voice and opportunities to be leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly is expanding possibilities, which is um, exposing them to new experiences and people, ideas, and places that just can broaden their horizons and expand just beyond on their world. So those are the 5 elements of the framework. And really we see them, the emphasis placed at different points depending upon development. And really those actions, I gave those examples and we have those 20 actions, but they can really be expressed differently depending upon, the student, the youth, the background characteristics, culture. And so again, it's a framework, but not, an exact roadmap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I appreciate that you note that it's distinct based on developmental stage and the individual, right? It's not a one size fits all, but each of these elements will be more relevant to the young person that we're interacting with based on their needs and what they're working through. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dallas, I understand that you've had mentors who've had these lasting impacts on you and your interests, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how some of these mentoring relationships have impacted you and whether you see some of these elements that Kara has noted in your interactions with them that have made them successful developmental relationships.
Yeah, of course. So around this time last year, I generally had no idea what I wanted to do after high school. I didn't know what major I wanted to pursue or not even like a career path I was interested in. But over the summer, I decided to explore the medical field through a program directed by Dr. Osborne, a head and neck specialist. And what stood out to me wasn't his expertise, but the way he showed up as a mentor, not only for me, but also for my entire cohort. He shared his personal experiences and challenges with medicine, presenting himself as a real person, someone who had faced uncertainty and struggle rather than somebody who had everything figured out, which is exactly what adolescents like me seek in mentorship relationships. Not only did Dr. Osborne help me find a career path I feel a passion for, he offered me his sincere support and not just for me, but for every single one of us. He mentored the way his mentorship has helped me has been through developing a mindset of identifying a problem and instead of just um, looking at it, I'm able to think about how I can act upon it. And that shift has been really impactful for me. I feel like he built that relationship off respect. He introduced himself. He made himself like relatable, and he respected us the same way we respected him.
Mm-hmm.
And um, that's really helped me today. I know millions of adolescents struggle with mental health challenges, and instead of being somebody who notices the issues and continues letting them go on, I felt compelled to take action and do something about it, which is exactly why I started Wellness Club at my school.
Mm-hmm.
It's a club where we focus on mental health and well-being and creating a space for open conversations with adolescents to normalize all these feelings we often tend to close off in fear of
Mm-hmm.
judgment. But overall, having a mentor like Dr. Osborne has showed me how powerful it is when adults simply meet you where you are and encourage you to turn curiosity and passion into care and action instead of trying to mold you into somebody you're not.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And it sounds like Dr. Osborne was really effective in establishing that relationship because he shared with you his own struggles or things he had overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the important things about mentors who are not your parents is that maybe they themselves may be more willing to share things that they've learned from or struggles they've had, right? Because as a parent, it may be more challenging to do that, but it sounds like he was really open with sharing those. And in turn, that led you to establish a club that was receptive and encouraging of young people doing the same in a space that was comfortable. Thank you. So Andrew, at the Center for the Developing Adolescent, we often discuss the key developmental needs for adolescents, and I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about how parents and other caregivers can help young people meet some of their key developmental needs, and maybe first describe what we mean by developmental needs.
Sure. What we have done at the center, along with a lot of our scientist partners from around the country and around the world, for that matter, have tried to distill a lot of what we know about the science of relationships, but even more broadly about other different aspects of adolescent development, and tried to distill them into sort of a set of core developmental needs, which really are collections of experiences and relationships that really are fundamental to support adolescent development as we go through the teenage years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I mean, we could talk about ways in which relationships will fit all of those needs, but that would take about a half hour. So we're not going to do that. I'll talk about a few. But before I do that, I just want to draw a couple linkages with what Odalis had to say and what Kara had to say. I think Odalis's Here's a story about Dr. Osborne, her mentor, really highlighted how love is complex and relationships are complex. And it doesn't mean just providing emotional support to individuals. Sometimes we just think about that, and that is critical and that's important. And Odalis, thank you for sharing how Dr. Osborne provided that to you. But at the same time, he was an inspiration for you. He served as a model. And I suspect, as Kara would say, he probably challenged you at times. He probably engaged in some sharing of power. And I really resonated, Kara, with the components of the developmental relationships, in particular, the idea of challenging growth and sharing power. And from the perspective of an adult who's been a mentor to people outside of my family, and as I have to young men in my family, challenging growth and sharing power, those are very difficult. They're very challenging. And I don't think we should sort of underestimate that. It's challenging for us as adults, but it's also challenging for the young person. And that's really where the complexity, where the learning process really needs to take place with young people. And as we move through adolescence, we also need to learn about our growth and when we are challenged and how to respond to challenge. And also to learn how, when we want to ask for power, but also to be respectful and to sharing power with our adults and so on. What does it mean to have a mature relationship? These things can be very difficult and very challenging for all of us. My sons were fortunate to have one particularly excellent mentor as part of her youth group as they basically from childhood to adolescence. And she would often say, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm just planting seeds. And we're planting seeds that are going to grow and develop as you go through the years. And you're, in many ways, when you talk about challenging growth, you're talking about promoting growth. So what it really means is that you may not see the outcome this year or next year or another for 5 or 10 years. But I think, Odalis, you're going to remember some things that Dr. Osborne had to say to you. Probably 5 years down the line, or when you graduated from college, you'll probably think, wow, you know, this one thing he said to me. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. Many times these developmental relationships with adults, we're planting seeds that we may not see immediately grow in the moment. So one thing I think, I'll talk about a couple of key developmental needs that I think this complexity, this challenging growth, sharing power, emotional support is really important for. One is that we often talk about the need to explore during the adolescent years, figuring out who we are, where do we belong, what do we like, where are we going to explore, or Dallas, are you going to go to college now? What kind of college? What are you going to major in? What's your interest going to be? Many times the exploration can be risky, chancy, scary, dangerous. You might make a mistake. And what you really need are people to help support you to do that. So they may give you ideas of how to explore, but also to support you when you make a mistake and you need to learn from your space, because that's all about experience. We need the experience during the adolescent years, and our developmental relationships with other adults really support that. We really need to develop a sense of agency. As we move through the adolescent years, we can't rely on other people to do everything for us. We increasingly need to take care of ourselves, make decisions for ourselves, regulate our emotions, and so on. And really having agency and developing that ability to do that are fundamental parts of relationships. And that's when I talked a little bit about both the expansion and the maturation of relationships, it's really that maturation of relationships that allows for agency. And again, this is one of the most challenging things for adults as we have our young people move into and through the adolescent years. How are we going to navigate agency? How are we going to support the development of agency? But the kinds of elements that Kara had talked about in Odalis and her experiences really gave some really insights of how we can support agency. And then finally, a key part of that agency is another need that we talk about, and that is the need to contribute during adolescence. Because probably one of the best predictors whether we feel like we have a sense of agency is whether we actually feel like we can contribute to others, to our settings in our lives, to our communities, and whether that contribution is welcomed and acknowledged. Could be those contributions sometimes are misplaced. They could be a mistake, but then we need to learn from it and need to be respected for it. And this really is a fundamental part of adolescence. And it's a fundamental part of where do we belong socially, what groups are we going to be a part of, and how are we going to interact vis-a-vis with the adults in our lives? Because every healthy community is multi-generational, right? We need to support and allow for the contribution of young people as they move into adulthood, because pretty soon they're going to be in the same position as other adults are, because they're going to be supporting the next generation as they move forward. So those are just a few examples. And then finally, I'm just going to throw this out there if we ever want to get into, if you heard our stuff at CDA, you know we like to talk about sleep. I'm just going to throw out there that when you have positive relationships in your lives, including your parents, that tends to be associated with better sleep at night.
Thank you, Andrew. I know those developmental needs came from a lot of work and conversation with experts in the field to identify what it is that young people need to move on to the next step, to transition into adulthood. And Kara, hearing these developmental needs, I'm wondering what are any of these developmental needs important to keep in mind for the adults who are supporting adolescents?
Yeah, I think the natural mentors and these other caring adults can really support all of those developmental needs that you're discussing, and that may look different, depending upon their role. But I guess I would highlight two here, and the first one is really just because across all of the youth that we survey, the element that they report experiencing the least is expand possibilities.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I think that that is, one area that can be focused on in terms of helping youth be able to try new things, expanding their networks of people to help them, reach their goals, and, develop that social capital, and then explore just parts of the world that they haven't seen before. And so I think that, really aligns with, and at the heart of it really is that healthy risk taking and exposure to new experiences. And, in a high school classroom, one that I was supporting and working with that was doing some career development, for example, one thing that they did was take the group to tour a culinary program at the local community college, but then they paired it with an event where then they got to sit down to a 5-course meal
Yeah.
and really get to see, for many of them, that was the first time of being able to do that. And beforehand, they knew and they studied, place settings, and we're just very excited about the
Yeah.
menu and this idea. And then seeing near peers, you know, cooking and being in the kitchen. And that was just a really exciting experience for them. Um, in a formal mentor setting, when we were interviewing some youth recently, even they said, when we were asking what can mentors and even other caring adults do to support your mental health, one of them, said, and it just stuck with me, is like, I've walked and been to everywhere within walking distance in my town. I want to get out and see some new things.
Uh-huh.
So they talked and found a shared interest in, well, the youth was interested in learning more or trying hiking. And so that became for a couple months a shared interest of exploring, different hikes that they could take together. And so it's like, yes, like I got out of town. And so it's, we can have these different, ways it can look different. So expand possibilities. And then as Andrew was saying, typically when I'm introducing the framework to adults, when parents, teachers, practitioners, the one element where it kind of gets like, what? I don't know, is the shared power, because it can
Uh-huh.
really hard. It doesn't mean, giving up authority, but in terms of adolescence, where we're really talking about this transition into, their need and desire, but to feel respected and to authentically have their voices heard and to be able to have these opportunities to develop and practice those decision-making skills. I mean, it's really important. And, in a classroom, it can even look as something like having, choice between different reading topics or a way that they'll demonstrate knowledge or who their partners are. And so those are just like kind of small ways that can start. And there's a whole continuum of ways that you can really share power. But sometimes when we're, talking about introducing it where someone feels like, well, I haven't done that before, that's also an important need to be able to address. Yeah.
I really appreciate the examples you've given about the exploring new hiking opportunities or sharing power in the classroom, because sometimes it it feels as though we make those bigger than they need to be. These notions of sharing power or exploring new things, that they don't need to be these grand gestures where, for example, we completely give up authority, or we take these giant leaps or risks. But from an adolescent's perspective, the novelty of experiencing these things is in and of itself an opportunity to share power or to explore or to do new things. And we sometimes get limited by what those elements mean, and asking the young person what it is that they would feel would satisfy those is probably a good first step. So thank you for sharing those examples. Odalis, was there anything from this conversation that especially resonated with you as we talked about the developmental needs or the ways in which we can satisfy these ways of engaging young people?
Yeah, of course. For me, I think adolescence is the time where you're figuring out who you are, and you don't necessarily have to have everything figured out and planned out. It's okay to learn from mistakes and uncertainty, and those experiences are often what help you understand yourself the most, which is why I believe autonomy and sort of the sharing of power is so important. Young people need the space to make their own choices and learn from them. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does sort of allow us to build our own resilience and independence from it. And if there was one thing I'd want people to take away from this conversation, it would be that supporting adolescents doesn't necessarily mean preventing failure. It means
Mm.
creating environments where it's safe to try and mess up and grow up, and knowing that there's caring adults out there who are going to be our support system along the way.
Can we quote you on that? I think it's such a perfect thing to say about how we think about adolescence at CDA, that it's not about preventing failure, because we know that failure is actually a really important component of helping the learning systems in the brain grow and mature, is that providing those opportunities for not getting it quite right every time, but also learning from those opportunities. So thank you. Thank you
Of
for that.
course. Thank you so much.
So, given that it's Valentine's Day in 2 days and we're talking about love and adolescence, can each of you think of an example of how the things you've spoken about may apply to the really exciting but sometimes challenging novelty of being in a romantic relationship for the first time?
That's a very Adriana question. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Could you rephrase it again?
How come what we've all been discussing about developmental needs and about supporting adults, how can we support young people during the transition of a romantic relationship?
So one thing I think that's been implicit, and particularly when Dallas was talking about her relationship with her mentor,
Mhm.
was the importance of trust in a relationship. And what trust means is that you feel that you can share your pain, failures, or whatever with that person to be
Yeah.
supported by it. The other part of trust So that's one thing, is that in order to support a young person who is developing their romantic relationships and all the strong feelings that come associated with it, we can't just jump in without having a trusting relationship with them in the first place and expect
Mhm.
them to share it with us. So that's number one. There needs to be a trusting relationship with a young person so that they can feel that they can bear their pain and their experiences and also their excitement and questions and awkwardness that come with relationships.
Mhm.
The other thing I'll tie to that is trust really develops with time. And that's one
Yes.
thing we haven't talked a little bit
Yeah.
about, and maybe we can get to a little bit later, but we're not going to help a young person by seeing them within 2 weeks, once or twice. This
Yes.
takes time to develop. So I think, particularly
Yeah.
for romantic relationships, it needs to be someone you have that long-term relationship that develops trust.
Thank you for, I meant to bring that up last time when you mentioned something, Andrew, and I forgot that the the trusting relationship typically won't start when the person becomes an adolescent, right? It's not an on or off switch. And establishing and coming back to your note about the importance of planting seeds, we can plant these trust seeds earlier before the young person is experiencing, the relationship change or the failure or whatever it is, that it needs to happen before, or not doesn't need to, but it would be more beneficial for the relationship if there was an established trust before there's an issue to be dealt with. Kara?
Yeah, a few things were coming to mind, so I tried to jot them down really
Mhm.
quickly. But I think that, in the context of being able to support a youth and develop this trust between them. I think that a couple of things, and Andrew, that you were saying time, it doesn't happen immediately, but I think it applies to this, even though it was in a formal mentoring context, that youth were saying that they felt would feel closer if they and could build that trust if they could see the person more often. And so it's just this kind of once a month type thing that kind of even text check-ins or something could be really helpful in terms of building that closeness. And they said a lot of life can happen in a month, and it feels weird to try to sum it up in sort
Yeah.
of a visit. And I think authenticity as well, and that's something I didn't. Well, authenticity in that they want to know more about the adult as well, and to have it
Mhm.
be a reciprocal sort of relationship. And I think, Odalis, you were saying,
Yeah.
this about your mentor of just showing up like as a person, and that also can build trust as well as that, this isn't one-sided, and that I can know a little about you. And really, I didn't say this earlier, but the developmental relationship really is seen as two-way, even though, today I was talking about it as from adult to youth, but really these relationships and can be the adults often benefit very much and from the relationships as well. And so it's kind of this reciprocal process. But I think what I've been hearing from adolescents most recently in some of the focus groups that we were conducting about what adults can do to support their mental health was like, please just listen.
Hmm.
I start to tell you something, please don't just jump in like and start problem solving, asking
Hmm.
a bunch of questions. Like I just need to talk about this. And so I think that that's one sort of shift, and awareness of the adult is to listen and even ask the youth, are you wanting me to listen? Are you wanting ideas or, just to see what they're interested in. And so that in terms of relationships, and that maybe being something that you want to provide guidance with it, that's still, having that listening ear and providing space for the youth to be able to talk, because if you jump in too quickly, it might shut it down. Not that there won't be other opportunities, but I guess I would say that authenticity and listening and then asking, what would you like from me?
Yeah, and I think that applies to all relationships, right? We want to have that reciprocity and not feel like the person's just going to come in and try to solve the problem. And that applies to a lot of our interactions with young people is treating it as we would other relationships with the respect that we give them as well. Oh,
Excellent.
Dallas, do you have any thoughts about this? And then we'll move on to some Q&A because I know we have some questions coming in.
Yeah. So I've actually been in a relationship, just one single relationship for the past 2.5 years. It's my
Mhm.
first. and only relationship. And at
Okay.
first, my parents, they sort of did oppose it. And now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably because of the age, but at the time, it felt like they didn't have trust in me. And
Yeah.
because I've always been the type of student who's gotten straight A's, and I've
Yeah.
always like helped them around the house. So it hurt sort of thinking that they didn't have the trust
Yeah.
in me to start like figuring things out. And but as time went on, I
Yeah.
was sort of able to talk to them more, and they started offering their help and talking to me. And whenever I had like problems in my relationship, I knew I was able to like go and talk to my parents, and they'd tell me about their personal experiences. So I was able to see them from like a whole new perspective instead of being like the perfect married couple that I always see. I was able to see different sides of them, and that definitely helped me a lot.
I'm so happy that you shared that because that is so exactly right what happens. And well, your first point, why not trust me? I'm so trustworthy and I do all these things. I'm so responsible. And then suddenly when I'm in a relationship, you have all these concerns, right? So that's absolutely right. Um, and I'm so happy that your parents share with you what they've experienced because that is exactly how not only we will build trust, but that's just an honest conversation is to say, I see where you're coming from and I know what you're experiencing. So thank you.
Odell, if I could just
Yeah,
jump in,
yeah,
Odalis's
please.
comments, and what Kara was saying is one thing just to elevate is an important part of a supportive relationship is knowing when to step back. And I
Yes.
think that's important. And it doesn't mean disappear, but it means
Mhm.
don't ask all the questions.
Yes.
And also, frankly, when you get to romantic relationships during adolescence, as a caring adult, you're not going to know everything. And we have to
Yeah.
accept that as well. And
Mhm.
not then rebel against that and get angry about that. We're not going to know the whole story all the time. And that's part of the challenge of being a supportive adult for young people.
That's right. And in admitting that we have different generational experiences. Maybe one of the most striking ones between those of us who grew up in the 80s or 90s is the advent of internet and social media and navigating relationships through a different medium is obviously going to have a different experience. Thank you. Okay, so we have some questions. So I'm hoping that the panelists will be willing to entertain some of them. The first is when you talk about this is not a one size fits all, especially in the parental relationship, please talk about the mentorship around an ADHD teen and the scaffolding piece that is very different from a neurotypical teen. So I think this question could be responded to specific to ADHD or just in general, a young person who's having atypical neurodevelopmental experience.
So I don't know, I guess if that was directed at me for talking about the developmental relationships framework, we actually have recently completed a study, or we're almost complete, but with a students with learning differences in high school that are reporting about their relationships with their parents and their teachers and these different elements of the framework. But I think that and I don't know that I'm answering the question exactly, but I think one thing that we did take away from this, because we surveyed all students, but was that a lot of the elements of the developmental relationships framework were really the same for youth in terms of the levels that some of the levels that they were reporting, but a lot of the youth reported very strong relationships with their parents. And I guess we don't at this point have really particular strategies for different like students with of parents with learning parents of students with learning differences. But I would say that, some of the things that we were talking about are really getting to know the youth, or having the youth lead and having some of these conversations about the relationship to learn, what this looks like in practice, or, for them about, what are the things, and it could be awkward because we don't often talk about these things, but like, what are the things that I do that or can do that make you feel really cared about?
Hmm.
And kind of starting with that share power component of getting to know some of these things that would work well with the youth a little bit more.
Hmm. Thank you. Other thoughts about this? Okay. Well, the next question is a little bit similar. And the question is for youth who have experienced significant trauma in their lives, do any of the developmental needs you've discussed become more important to address? Are there greater challenges in terms of meeting these needs with youth who have experienced trauma? Maybe Andrew, you can respond to that.
I think it depends on the kind of trauma. It depends
Mhm.
on when it experienced and whether it's still ongoing or not. I think these are important things to consider. I think two things that do come up from research is those who've experienced significant forms of trauma, either very significant early on in life or continued, are still developing emotion regulation skills differently than those who have not experienced trauma. And so I think relationships might involve perhaps more intensity or more emotion and more challenges of emotion regulation than others. And I think that's something to be aware of and be ready. And I think folks who support those who've experienced early adversity and trauma are aware of that and attend to that. Uncertainty and trust are also important for those who experience trauma, particularly as we move through the adolescent years and through high school. If we're moving into a situation where you're becoming an adult and then either you are going to be moving outside of the home or perhaps you've already been outside of the home because of forms of trauma. Uncertainty can be very big, and the ability to deal with uncertainty and the unpredictability of life can be more challenging for young people who've experienced early adversity. So I think structuring relationships and systems and being aware of that uncertainty and perhaps being more supportive of that and more attentive to that and other, because they just have not experienced as many nets throughout those years that are going to allow it to catch them. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And related to that, of course, is trust. Is if part of their trauma has to do with relational trauma, their ability to develop trust, understandably, will just take more time. And I think that's where the more of the time and energy that's going to be involved and will be necessary.
I think it's an important point you bring up about the time it takes and then also the seemingly small actions that will signal that the person is trustworthy and there for support rather than judgment or some other reason. So thank you.
Yeah, Adriana, just to elaborate on that, just as you and I have spent a lot of time talking to communities that support foster youth and people who've been in
Hmm.
the foster system. And time again, the story of relationship turnover and
Hmm.
churn and
Yeah.
instability has been so significant. By the time, if they're in the foster system during adolescence, they've experienced it a lot, not just a couple of years, over many years. So the time and the trust issues are going to be very, very significant for those
Yeah.
who have had experience in the foster system.
Yeah. And that lack of trust, as you mentioned, for someone who's experienced a lot of turnover in caregiving support is is actually adaptive, right? Our brain is really good at picking up on when situations are uncertain, when we should be on heightened awareness or have heightened awareness. And so it's not surprising. It's not a personal lack of distrust or immediate suspicion. It's really based on the fact that over and over there's been turnover and that person's brain has adjusted to that. So undoing that is really important. Um, okay, the next question is about how can a caring adult be intentional in structuring a relationship with an adolescent in a way that does not seek to replace what the adolescent has with their parents, especially in situations where the adolescent does not have a very supportive background or trusting relationship with the parents? How can we simply remain a caring adult and not a parent? What are approaches that can be used?
Maybe Dallas, can you tell us how Mr. Osborne has provided support, but not as a parent from your
Mhm.
experience?
Mhm.
Yeah, of course. So, as I mentioned, I am a first generation student. So, there are certain things that my parents can't precisely support me with. And Dr. Osborne, I feel like he's stepped up, not as a parental figure, but definitely as somebody I can trust and sort of build, um, like my sort of like develop my career goals, because being a doctor takes a lot of things, and when you don't have like connections in your family, it becomes really difficult. So Dr. Osborne just being there and being willing to sort of show me how exactly to navigate the healthcare system, the medical system, and show me what he did has been really helpful. And it definitely helped me build trust in him. Very different from how I build trust in my parents. I know they're always going to be there and they're going to be at home whenever I get stressed out or whenever I just simply need to talk. It's definitely more like of an emotional relationship with my parents versus Dr. Osborne. It's more, I'd say maybe professional wise,
Uh-huh.
but still helpful.
You bring up an important point about having an adult who can provide the scaffolding for operations or procedures, like you're mentioning, like the healthcare system or navigating maybe the school system, and those are also examples of how we can provide care, right? Is teaching someone things that sometimes may take for granted as adults that young people might not have had the opportunity to learn about. Kara, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I had a couple. One of them was just being clear about your own role. And I
Yeah.
know sometimes that can be challenging
Mhm.
when, a youth doesn't have strong relationships with caregivers. But I think just being clear about your intention and your role, I think even having trying to have compassion also for the parents and the family, because a lot of times that can, maybe um, I don't know, not pit them against each other or something, but just being thoughtful and mindful about that role, and trying, if possible, to have a connection even with the parent, because I know sometimes that there can become some sort of tensions when for example, a mentor might be doing things or taking them places or having experiences maybe that the family can't afford,
Yeah.
isn't able to access. So I think it's kind of being mindful and intentional about that. And even if possible, just having that connection with the parent where you're able to communicate your intentions and your support
Yes.
for the child. But then also having boundaries. As I was rereading the question, how can you simply remain a caring adult and not a parent? I
Mhm.
think that's also having boundaries and modeling that in a relationship for the
Mhm.
is also really important about, what you can and what you can't do and what
Yeah.
you
Yeah, and one thing we said at the beginning of this webinar is that adults and mentors can serve different roles, right? One person is not everything, and so understanding, like you're saying, setting boundaries and expectations and intentions is really important for delineating those different roles. Okay, our last question before we close is, what, if any, differences are there between the relationship needs of early adolescents, let's say middle school, versus older adolescents, people in high school or their early 20s? Andrew, I know you and I have talked a lot about how adolescence spans a long time and it's not just a one size fits all or one age is applicable. So, any thoughts about this?
Well, I think the most obvious one is how agency develops, and so the types of experiences and the way that relationships will support agency for someone in middle school versus high school is going to be very, very different. And
Mhm.
one thing that is happening is our ability to make decisions
Mhm.
increasingly get sophisticated as we move through adolescence. And it's important to keep that in mind. So when are 11 years old, it's very different than we're 16. And
Mhm.
frankly, which is very different from we're 21, that continues to develop over time. And
Mhm.
so I think the sort of allowances of the range at which you can make decisions on your own and for yourself, for example, will change over time. Relationships have to change. They just simply do. And so this gets me back to my early work in graduate school. My first second year project was basically on on the transition to middle school, our parents affording agency and decision making to their young people and their family. And if they're not, then actually those young adolescents are going to find other relationships in which they have agency, and those are peer relationships. And it
Mhm.
shouldn't be either or, it should be both. And I
Yeah.
think idea of thinking of gradual allowances of giving agency over time over certain kinds of topics at certain points in their life. When you move in middle school, choosing about what you get to wear, perhaps the hairstyle, who your friends are going to be. And then as you move over time, there are going to be bigger decisions that you want to say over, like, I'm going to take a job or not, what kind of a job I'm going to take, and things like that, or who am I going to spend time with. I think that is a fundamental difference between the two.
And thank you for underscoring the importance of change that we is inevitable and not only inevitable, but developmentally appropriate for not only for the young person to change, but for the relationships with their caring adults to change as well. Thank you.
I just had one last thought.
Yeah.
That too is that it won't be perfect for
Yeah,
the
that's right.
it's like
That is definitely true.
trial and error in that. And and just even personally talking about, okay, how are we, like social media use or something, how are we going to support and supervise that? But knowing that we need to have like a trajectory and like a scaffolding, and that it can't always be locked down, but how do we do that? And sometimes there's mistakes happen, or you said something or did something, and that's another just important part of building trust and sharing power, is for the adults to be able to admit a mistake. I made
Yes,
a mistake. I should have
exactly.
this.
Exactly. We've never done this before either, right?
Yeah.
We've never parented or mentored a young person as we come into it. So that's also our learning opportunity as well. Yeah, thank you.
I think the other thing just to add to it is to remember what kind of information we're seeking at different ages. When we move
Yes,
into middle school, we want social information about how to get along with and what are friends like. How are we
yeah,
going to get that? Or what we should wear and what we should look like. Do our parents know of those things as well as our friends? Probably not as well at
yeah,
that point. But when we move through adolescence and thinking about the transition to adulthood like a Dallas, that's when adults know more. And
yeah.
that's oftentimes. So sometimes, although we're important all the way through, seeking information will change. The kind of information we're looking for will depend upon the age.
That's right. Thank you. Okay, well, I think we're out of time. I know we're out of time, and I appreciate all of you sharing your insights and your personal experience and for this rich conversation. So, for all of you, thank you for listening, and we will post this to our CDA website and YouTube, and you can catch anything that you missed there. Thank you.